When you get a Remainer, a Foreign Office Remainer, backing the deal that he says delivers Brexit, you begin to worry whether something isn't wrong. I come into this debate not just as somebody who spent 20 years in the European Parliament, something I've enjoyed more than they have.
The House of Commons is supposed to be where British democracy lives and breathes, where elected officials debate, discuss, and defend the interests of millions. But what happens when that sacred space turns into something resembling a street brawl? When politicians lose their composure so completely that they shout at their opponents to literally shut up? That's exactly what unfolded recently, and the fallout is shaking Westminster to its very foundations. A single exchange exposed something far deeper than a heated argument. Prime Minister Keir Starmer found himself in the middle of a political storm when Nigel Farage dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. The question wasn't just uncomfortable, it was explosive, and the reaction from the government benches, absolutely chaotic. Stay with us to uncover the shocking truth behind this story. Starmer faces his biggest challenge yet. Parliament has witnessed its share of fiery debates over the centuries. Churchill's wartime speeches, Thatcher's handbag diplomacy, Blair's persuasive rhetoric. These moments defined British political discourse. But something fundamentally different happened during this particular Prime Minister's questions session. This wasn't about policy disagreements or political philosophy. This was raw, unfiltered panic. Keir Starmer sat on those famous green benches, probably expecting another routine Wednesday grilling. Prime Minister's questions are never easy, but they follow a predictable rhythm. Opposition leaders ask their prepared questions, the Prime Minister delivers his rehearsed answers, backbenchers cheer or jeer accordingly, and everyone moves on. Except today, that comfortable routine got obliterated. The atmosphere in the chamber was already tense. Brexit remains a wound that hasn't fully healed in British politics. The divisions run deep.
The Brexit isn't helping to do that.
Brexit is and was and will be a total disaster.
Brexit is doing the economy real damage.
Brexit, as negotiated, is frankly a disaster.
Cutting through party lines and splitting communities. Immigration policy sits at the heart of those divisions. It's the issue that drove millions to vote Leave back in 2016. The promise was simple. Take back control of our borders. Let Britain decide who comes and who stays. That promise resonated with working-class communities across the nation, including millions of traditional Labour voters who broke away from their party over this single issue. Fast forward to today, and those promises feel hollow to many. Thousands of people continue arriving across the English Channel monthly, small boats making dangerous crossings.
The number of migrants crossing the Channel to the UK in small boats in the first half of this year has risen by more than 40% compared with the same period last year.
Men, women, sometimes children, risking everything for a chance at a new life. The human cost is tragic. The political cost is enormous. Every boat that lands on British shores represents a failure of government policy in the eyes of those who voted for control. Enter Nigel Farage, the man who became the face of Brexit, who spent decades being dismissed by the establishment as a fringe figure, who got laughed at in the European Parliament, who was written off more times than anyone can count. Yet here he stands, back in Westminster, now as an elected member of Parliament representing Reform UK. And he brought with him the same question that's haunted British politics for years. When Farage rose to speak, something shifted in the chamber. You could feel it. The Labour benches tensed up immediately. They knew what was coming. Farage doesn't do gentle questions or diplomatic language. He goes straight for the throat. And his target today was immigration policy, specifically the continued arrivals across the Channel, despite years of promises to stop them. He reminded the Prime Minister that millions voted for Brexit precisely to control immigration. That demand hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's grown stronger. The British public wants answers. They want action. They want the government to demonstrate that Parliament, not international courts or French politicians, controls British borders. Farage demanded that Starmer tell the French president directly, "Britain will not accept undocumented males crossing the English Channel."
Interestingly, we're also 9 years on from Brexit, where we voted very clearly to take back control of our borders. He's trying to do a deal with the French where they will get the upper hand.
That Britain won't be dictated to by what he called an increasingly arrogant anti-Brexit French government. The question hit like a thunderbolt, because it wasn't just about policy. It was about sovereignty, national pride, and broken promises. It touched the rawest nerve in British politics. The chamber erupts into absolute chaos. What happened next will go down in parliamentary history, not for the right reasons. The Labour benches exploded, not with reasoned counter-arguments or policy defenses, with noise. Pure, coordinated noise designed to drown out Farage's voice. MPs started shouting over him, trying to prevent him from finishing his question. It wasn't spontaneous heckling. This felt orchestrated, like a planned disruption. Heckling happens in Parliament all the time. It's part of the theater, the rough and tumble of political debate. A few jeers here, some laughter there, maybe a pointed comment. But this was different. This was multiple members of Parliament simultaneously trying to shout down a fellow member asking a legitimate question during Prime Minister's questions. The volume rose to ridiculous levels. The Speaker struggled to maintain order. Farage stood his ground. The man has faced hostile crowds across Europe for decades. He's been through media firestorms, personal attacks, even physical threats. A few shouty MPs weren't going to rattle him. He kept his composure, waiting for the noise to die down so he could finish his question. His face remained calm, almost amused, like he expected exactly this reaction. But then came the moment that changed everything. Through all the shouting and chaos, one voice cut through louder than the rest. An MP, identity unclear in the mayhem, screamed across the chamber, "Would you shut up?" Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Did that really just happen? In the House of Commons, the same institution that prides itself on centuries of civilized debate? Where MPs address each other as Right Honourable and Learned Friend? Where rules of conduct are so strict that you can't even call another member a liar? Someone just told a fellow MP to shut up. Out loud, during Prime Minister's questions, broadcast live on television. The collective shock rippled through the chamber. Even the usually rowdy backbenchers went quiet for a moment, realizing that someone had crossed a serious line. This wasn't clever political theater or witty banter. This was a complete breakdown of parliamentary decorum. Farage didn't even flinch. He just stared in the direction of the outburst with an expression that mixed contempt and satisfaction. Because in that single moment, that anonymous MP had handed him the biggest political gift imaginable. They'd proven his entire point about the establishment's inability to handle uncomfortable truths. The Speaker tried desperately to restore order, calling for quiet, reminding members about proper conduct. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. The chamber had descended into the kind of chaos that makes people question whether their representatives are capable of governing at all. Starmer's response reveals everything. Once order was somewhat restored, Starmer had to respond, and his answer revealed just how deep the government's problems run on this issue. Instead of addressing the substance of Farage's question about border control and French cooperation, Starmer went on the attack. He talked about fixing the mess inherited from the previous government. He mentioned working with other countries and taking necessary measures. He accused Farage of breaking everything and claiming that's how you fix things, of sticking two fingers up at neighbors and then expecting cooperation. It was a politician's answer. Lots of words, very little substance. The kind of response that sounds good in a soundbite, but doesn't actually address the question being asked. Starmer pointed out that Farage voted against the Borders Bill, which supposedly gives more powers to law enforcement. Then came the real attack. Farage has no interest in fixing the problem because he wants to milk it and exploit it for political gain. There's the strategy. Don't answer the question about why boats keep coming. Instead, attack the questioner's motives. Suggest they're deliberately keeping the problem alive for political advantage. It's a clever deflection, the kind that works in normal political debate. But this wasn't normal debate. Not after what just happened. Not after multiple MPs had lost control trying to shout Farage down. Not after someone had literally screamed at him to shut up on live television. The contrast was stark. Farage had asked a direct question about government policy and action. Starmer responded with attacks on Farage's character and voting record. One looked like he wanted answers. The other looked like he was desperately trying to change the subject. And the British public was watching all of it unfold in real time. Why this moment changes British politics forever. Here's what really matters about this exchange. This wasn't just another parliamentary dust-up that'll be forgotten by next week. This was a turning point that exposed fundamental problems in how Britain's political establishment operates. First, the coordinated attempt to shout down Farage revealed genuine panic. These weren't MPs casually heckling because they disagreed. These were politicians desperately trying to prevent a question from being heard. That level of disruption suggests they knew the question was dangerous, that it touched on issues they have no good answers for. Immigration remains the government's weakest point. Every month, boats arrive. Every month, the numbers add up. Every month, communities across Britain see the gap between what was promised and what's being delivered. Farage knows this. Labour knows he knows this. And they know he'll keep hammering on it until they provide real solutions. Second, the "shut up" outburst crystallized everything wrong with modern political discourse. When you can't win an argument with facts or logic, you try to silence your opponent. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism dressed up in parliamentary procedure. The MP who shouted that probably thought they were defending their team. Instead, they exposed the establishment's deepest fear, losing control of the narrative. Third, Farage's calm response to the chaos demonstrated why he's become such a formidable political force. Lesser politicians would have gotten angry, shouted back, escalated the confrontation. Farage just stood there, let them reveal themselves, and calmly finished his question. It was a masterclass in political discipline. He knew the footage would go viral. He knew the headlines would write themselves. He knew that every second of chaos made his point more powerfully than any speech ever could. Fourth, Starmer's deflective response highlighted the government's lack of credible solutions. When your best answer to "why are boats still coming" is "the other guy voted against our bill," you're admitting you don't have real results to point to. You're playing political games instead of solving actual problems. The British public isn't stupid. They can see through these tactics. They notice when politicians avoid answering direct questions. They remember promises made and broken, and they're keeping score. The establishment's worst nightmare has materialized. For decades, the British political establishment operated within comfortable boundaries. Labour and Conservatives disagreed on plenty, but they agreed on the fundamental rules of the game. Third parties were curiosities, not threats. Outsiders were dismissed, not engaged. Brexit shattered that cozy arrangement. It proved that the establishment could be beaten, that millions of ordinary people would reject the advice of their supposed betters when given the chance. That democracy could produce outcomes the elite never saw coming. Farage was the face of that victory, and the establishment never forgave him for it. They tried everything to neutralize him. Character assassination in the media, deplatforming by banks, social ostracism, legal challenges. None of it worked. He kept coming back, kept building support, kept asking uncomfortable questions. Now he's inside their sacred chamber, sitting on their benches, following their procedures, and using their own rules to hold them accountable. This is the establishment's nightmare scenario. They can't ignore him. They can't dismiss him as a fringe figure anymore. He's a democratically elected member of parliament with every right to question the prime minister. So they tried to shout him down instead. And when that didn't work, they told him to shut up. And in doing so, they revealed their complete inability to handle genuine opposition. The footage from this session will be replayed for years. It'll appear in Reform UK campaign videos. It'll be shared millions of times on social media. It'll be discussed in pubs and living rooms across Britain. Because it perfectly captured the moment when the mask slipped and the establishment's panic became visible to everyone. This moment also represents a broader trend in Western democracies. Across Europe and America, traditional political parties are struggling to address concerns about immigration, national sovereignty, and cultural change. When they can't provide satisfactory answers, they try to delegitimize the questions themselves. They label critics as extremists or bigots or conspiracy theorists. They appeal to procedural rules to shut down debate. But voters aren't buying it anymore. They see their communities changing rapidly. They see policies implemented without their consent. They see politicians who seem more concerned with international reputation than domestic priorities. And they're demanding answers. Farage has built his entire career on asking those questions, on forcing the establishment to confront issues they'd rather avoid, on representing people who feel ignored by mainstream politics. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny his effectiveness at this role. The shut up moment will embolden him. It'll validate his message that the establishment fears genuine debate. It'll attract more support from people who feel similarly silenced. And it'll force the government to either provide real answers or face growing political consequences. What happens next will define Britain's future. This confrontation isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of a much larger battle over Britain's direction. Immigration will remain at the center of political debate for years to come. The boats will keep coming until someone implements policies that actually work. Every arrival will fuel more questions, more anger, more demands for action. Farage will keep asking those questions, keep forcing the issue into public conversation. The government has three options. They can continue deflecting, attacking critics while avoiding substantial policy changes. That's the easiest path short-term, but guarantees growing political problems long-term. They can crack down harder, implementing stricter border policies, even if that damages relationships with France and EU countries. That might satisfy voters, but creates international complications. Or they can try to shift the conversation entirely, emphasizing other issues and hoping immigration fades from public consciousness. None of these options are particularly appealing. Each carries significant risks, but doing nothing isn't viable either. The status quo is politically unsustainable. Meanwhile, Reform UK and Farage will capitalize on moments like this. They'll present themselves as the only party willing to speak uncomfortable truths, the only politicians brave enough to challenge the establishment consensus, the only representatives who actually listen to ordinary people's concerns. That message is resonating. Reform is growing in polls. They're attracting voters from both Labour and Conservative backgrounds. They're becoming a genuine force in British politics, not just a protest vote. The traditional parties are struggling to respond. Labour can't move right on immigration without alienating their urban progressive base. Conservatives can't move right either without looking hypocritical after failing to control borders during 14 years in government. Both are trapped between incompatible voter coalitions. This creates space for reform to grow. Every chaotic parliamentary session helps them. Every deflective answer from ministers helps them. Every moment when the establishment loses its composure helps them. The British political landscape is fragmenting. The two-party system that dominated for generations is breaking down. New forces are rising. Old certainties are collapsing. And nobody really knows what comes next. But one thing is certain. Moments like this parliamentary chaos will be remembered as turning points, as the times when the old order's inability to adapt became undeniable, when the gap between governing class and governed became too wide to ignore. The truth nobody wants to admit. Here's what really happened in that chamber. It wasn't just about immigration policy or parliamentary procedure. It was about power. Who has it, who's losing it, and who's fighting desperately to keep it. The establishment built its authority on the assumption that they knew best, that their expertise, education, and experience qualified them to make decisions for everyone else, that the public should trust their judgment even when outcomes don't match promises. Brexit challenged that assumption. Millions of people rejected expert advice and voted for something the establishment unanimously opposed. They said, in effect, "We don't trust you anymore." That trust hasn't been restored. If anything, the gap has widened. And politicians like Farage represent the public's loss of faith in traditional leadership. When those MPs tried to shout him down, they weren't just opposing his views. They were trying to suppress the voice of everyone who shares his concerns, everyone who voted for Brexit, everyone who wants controlled immigration, everyone who feels ignored by mainstream politics. That shut-up outburst was directed at millions of British citizens as much as at Farage himself. It revealed an attitude of contempt toward voters who refused to accept the establishment's preferred narrative. And that's why this moment matters so much, because it pulled back the curtain on how the establishment really views dissent, not as healthy democratic debate, but as an irritation to be silenced. The British public saw that. They heard it. They won't forget it. So, what's the takeaway from all this chaos? British politics has entered a new phase, one where the old rules don't apply, where establishment credentials don't guarantee authority, where uncomfortable questions can't be swept under the rug anymore. The confrontation between Starmer and Farage was just one battle in a much longer war over Britain's future. And based on how the government's supporters reacted, they're deeply worried about losing that war. Whether you support Farage or oppose him, whether you want stricter immigration controls or more open borders, you have to acknowledge what happened in that chamber. Democracy requires the ability to ask difficult questions and demand real answers. When politicians try to shout down legitimate inquiries, when they tell their opponents to shut up rather than engaging with their arguments, the system itself is in danger. This moment exposed that danger for everyone to see. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to like and subscribe. British politics is getting more unpredictable by the day, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The establishment thought they could control the narrative, but moments like this prove they're losing that control. Stay tuned, because the real fireworks are just beginning.